Hello students, welcome in English class. As you all know that we have completed a novel in last lecture and two essays before that. Our short stories are also completed and the poems are also completed of unit first. This is our last chapter of unit 1 syllabus. So today we will also complete that. From after that you will just revise your syllabus for your exam. So here we will start. But I must return to the question, why is there a difference in the patterns of creativity among the practitioners in the art and the practitioners in the sciences? So here the writer is starting the chapter with one question, that why there are differences between the patterns of creativity among arts and science. So now the writer is talking about arts and science. One side he has put on arts and on one side science. That what are the differences between art and science? What are differences between patterns of creativity? I shall not attempt to answer this question directly, but I shall make an assortment of remarks which may bear on the answer. So he is saying that directly I will not answer this question, I will just show you some remarks that will answer this question. First, I should like to consider how scientists and poets view one another. When one thinks of attitude of poets to science, one almost always thinks of Wordsworth and Keats and their oft-quoted lines. So he says that firstly I will tell you that I will like to tell you that how scientists and poets view one another, that how they view one each other. When one thinks of attitude of poets to science, we always think about Wordsworth and Keats. So whenever we think about science and poetry, we always think about Wordsworth and Keats and their lines. Which lines? A fingry slave, one that would peep and botanish upon his mother grave, a reasoning self-suffering thing, an intellectual all in all. Sweet is the lore which nature brings, a melding intellect mishaps the beauteous forms of things we murder to dissect. So here in this poem by Wordsworth, in these lines by Wordsworth, the Wordsworth is just telling about the philosophy of natural things. He's just talking about the natural beauty, intellectual, all these things. And one more poem by, do not all charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy? There was an awful rainbow once in heaven, we know her woof, her texture she is given in the dull catalogue of common things, philosophy will clip an angle's wing. So here these lines are by Keats. So here Keats is also talking about cold philosophy. Means he just saying that with the science, with intelligence, with intellectual, we can give wings to our knowledge. It gives us charms. So he is also talking about philosophy and intellectual. These lines perhaps find an echo in a statement of the Lord's Dickens, when science arrives, it expels literature. So here Dickson says that when science reaches, it expels. Expels means throw out. It throw out literature. It is to be expected that one should find scientists countering these views. Thus Peter Medawar counters Lowell's Dickens vibe. So some scientists are countering, means opposing these views. What they are saying by Peter Medawar? The case I shall find evidence for is that when literature arrives, it expels science. Here the person is saying then when literature arrives, it expels science. So in first line what we see by Dickson, that when science arrives, it expels literature. The ways things are at present, it is simply no good pretending that science and literature represent complementary and mutually sustaining endeavors to reach a common goal. On the contrary, where they might be expected to cooperate, they compete. So here the Medawar is saying that literature and science are two different fields. So they are not complementary of each other, and it is not expected that they are having their endeavors are to reach a common goal. They are not contemporary, they do not cooperate each other. They are just compete with each other. It would not seem to me that one can go very far in these matters by pointing accusing fingers at one another. So, let me only say that attitudes of Wordsworth and Keats are by no means typical. So, their attitude towards science is typical. A scientist would rather consider the attitude of Shelley, but scientists follow the attitude of Shelley more than Wordsworth and Keats. Why? Shelley is a scientist poet. We can say Shelley is a scientist poet. It is not an accident that the most discriminating literary criticism of Shelley thought and work is by a distinguished scientist, Desmond King Halley. So he says that it is not an accident that the most of the work of Shelley is criticized by a scientist, that is King Halley. King Halley has pointed out Shelley's attitude to science emphasizes the surprising modern climate of thoughts in which he chose to live, and Shelley described the mechanism of nature with a precision and a wealth of detail unparalleled in English poetry. And here is A.N. Whitehead's testimony. So King Halley says that pointed out that Shelley's attitude to science just emphasis on modern climate of thoughts. It goes to nature, that it chooses to live, the mechanism of nature, that how nature works, how nature deals with all, how what we are doing with the nature. So A.N. Whitehead said Shelley's attitude to science was at the opposite pole to that of Wordsworth, that he is just opposite of Wordsworth. He loved it and it never tired of expressing in poetry the thoughts which it suggests. It symbolized to him joy and peace and illumination. So here A.N. Whitehead says that Shelley always express his views on science in his poetry about the thoughts, and it also suggests joy, peace, and so many things. I would like to read two examples from Shelley's poetry which support what has been said about him. The first example is from his Claude, which fuses together a creative myth, a scientific monograph, a gay Pikachu tale of Claude adventure. So here it is, these lines are taken from his Claude. So let us see what is in this poem. I am the daughter of earth and water, and the nursling of the sky. I pass through the ports of the ocean, the shores. I change, but I can't die. For after the rain, when never stain, the pavilion of heaven is where, and the winds and the sunbeams with their convex gleams build up the blue dome of air. I silently laugh at my own canotoph, and out of the caverns of rain, like a child from the bomb, like a ghost from the tomb, I arise and unbuild it again. So in this poem, Shelley beautifully described the cycle of water, that how it comes on earth, how it goes in sky, in ocean, shores with the help of sun, air. Again the cycle reveals of water with the rain. So scientific views are well explained in this poem. And second example of Shelley is Prometheus Unbound, which has been described by Herbert Reed as the greatest expression ever given to humanity's desire for intellectual light and spiritual liberty. So it is the greatest expression by Shelley to humanity's desire for intellectual light and spiritual liberty. Here the poet is talking about intellectualism and spiritualism. In the last poem he is just talking about the natural things, natural materials. Here he is talking about spiritual and intellectual. The lightning is his slave, heaven's utmost deep, give up her stars, and like a flock of sheep, they pass before his eye, are numbered and rolled on. The tempest is his steed, he stride the air, and the abyss shout from her depth, laid bare, heaven has no secret, man unveils me, I have none. So this is also a poem by him which describes the intellectual and spiritual liberty, that how we feel freedom. Let me turn to a slightly different aspect of the matter. What are we to make of the following confessions of Charles Darwin? So Charles Darwin has given some confessions here. We should read that. Up to the age of 30 or beyond it, poetry of many kinds, such as the works of Milton, Gray, Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Shelley, gave me great pleasure. And even as a schoolboy, I took intense delight in Shakespeare, especially historical plays. So Darwin says that when I was till 30, I enjoyed the poetry of these poets and the plays of Shakespeare. I have also said that formerly pictures gave me considerable and music very great delight. Music and pictures gave me delight that time. But now for many years I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. Now I never read a line of poetry. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare and found it so intolerably dull. That is nauseated me. Now I never read Shakespeare's play. I have almost lost my taste for pictures or music. My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding journal laws out of large collection of facts. But why this should have caused the atrophy of that part of the brain alone on which the higher taste depends, I cannot conceive. So here the Darwin expresses about his two different aspects of his life, that till 30 he enjoyed the poetry, but after so many years now he never read any poetry